All right, welcome everyone to my kickoff event for January 2022, this wonderful new year. My name is Nikki Akbariwa, and I am a nurse and an entrepreneur. And I wanted to start this year off with doing more conversational dialogues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I really want to make this a theme. I want to make this something that is just a monthly either lunch and learn or chat and chew. But I wanted to say thank you so much for taking time out of your day to just be present. As nurses and healthcare professionals, we are busy. As people, we are busy. And so I want to keep this to about no more than 20 to 30 minutes at a time. But it's just an opportunity to drop in and just to really find a way to devote some extra time to thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, with that being said, I do have a few slides that I want to share with you today, and we'll go ahead and get started. So let me share my screen. And that's just me, of course. All right, I do have just a few slides. All right. And unfortunately, it started from the end. So let me back this up to the beginning. All right. Okay. So I wanted to talk about making diversity, equity, and inclusion an everyday habit. And I think it's something that's totally doable. I've been practicing as a nurse for about 15 years now. I've been practicing as a DEI coach and consultant for about 5 years now. And over that time, things have really changed in the way that we look at healthcare and the way we look at equity. Of course, in 2020, with the event with George Floyd, we've really created a lot of initiative in healthcare to be more intentional about talking about this. So I want to create these spaces so that you can find some practical applications to how to make this be a part of your everyday work or your everyday life. And like I said, I'd love for these to be monthly lunch and learns, chat and choose, in which I will give a free copy of my workbook at every single one of these events. So definitely come. But before we begin, I do want to have an acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that I am situated on the unceded land of the Piscataway, Susquehannock, Cherokee, Lumbee, and the Algonquin speaking people in Baltimore City. And I ask you to also join me in acknowledging these communities and their past, their present, and future generations. And let us strive to hold space and value these nations and their perspectives, their histories, their cultures, and traditions. So, just as a brief, I'm going to introduce a little bit more about myself, why I do this work, the importance of Dr. King's mission, why his work still matters today, and then identify 3 ways that we can make DEI an everyday habit, and then a debrief if we have a little bit of time to do that. So, I like to situate myself in these conversations. And first and foremost, I do identify as she, her, and hers. And I also identify as a person who is able bodied, who can use their body and arms and legs and feet in the ways that I desire to. I identify as neurotypical, which means that the ways in which I learn are ways in which are commonly taught in our society. And there are other ways, that I want to identify, but I'm also a writer, a speaker, and a coach, of course. Now, why do I identify and position myself? I do this because I want you to all understand that we're all diverse, that there is no one that lacks diversity. And I know that a lot of the times, especially as white bodied people, there's a struggle to understand and to identify your own diversity. And something that really helped me along the way was this wonderful wheel of power and privilege, which we can talk about in an upcoming, hopefully, chat and chew, where it talks about how we are situated in terms of advantage and disadvantage. And these are some of the descriptors like able bodied, neurotypical, slim, being a homeowner, speaking English. Those are ways that we identify, and they also represent how we are diverse. So keep that in mind as we're talking today. Also, just to share with you, I did write a workbook, which is the clinician's guide to microaggressions and unconscious bias. Why did I do this? Well, my number one reason for doing it was that it was really missing largely in my education as a nurse, missing in the didactic portion, missing in the clinical portion of my learning, which is incredibly empowering for nurses and doctors and social workers, all of us that have a clinical didactic piece to our work. this was something that I felt was really missing. And what was missing? Well, what was missing was talking about the social implications or the social impacts of health. We do a great job talking about the biological, pathophysiological perspectives, but when it really comes to talking about the social aspects, it was really missing. And the second reason was because I myself experience microaggressions and unconscious bias. It happened in nursing school. It continues to happen today. And I wanted to give clinical leaders a tool, a ready tool to really think through practical ways to address these things as they come. And it's ideal for clinical leaders because you are literally connecting from theory to practice. So that's really why this workbook is so ideal for people who are working in clinical spaces. So if you know of schools of nursing or schools in which there are healthcare clinical didactic portions, please share this workbook or please share the work that I'm doing with them because I really want to expand this to more people. So, one thing that I love about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is that he had so many amazing things that he said in his lifetime, didn't he? He did so many things. And today is the day that we are honoring him on January 17th. We honor his work, we honor his life. And of all the quotes, and there are a lot of quotes that I could pull for Dr. King, this is the one that I felt today really resonated with me. And it just says, we must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools, right? We have to learn how to appreciate. That's what this says to me. We have to learn how to appreciate our diversity, appreciate the ways in which we can bring our diverse perspectives and abilities together so that we can grow and we can live together. Because I don't know about you, but I'm really tired of really fighting, feeling like I'm fighting for every single thing in my life and feeling like I have to be so uncomfortable in these spaces. I think that we're intended and destined for greater. And also, I want to take a moment and to thank Black men for the historical contributions that they have made to society as a whole. I don't think we think about it often. I think we sort of take it for granted, or just the fact that it's just excluded, or Black and Brown people are so excluded from history in America, except for in the ways of looking at slavery and those ways. But when we look at all of the ways in which the Black body has built this country, not only the actual physical labor, but the brilliance of mind and spirit, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you specifically to Black men. And what I wanted to do was just kind of highlight a couple of things and think about the ways in which we look at the presence of Black men in society. Like, I know that I have many words that I think of for Black men. I think of them as heroes. I think of them as significant, as strong, as capable. But is that how we see Black and Brown people in society? Well, my Google search says no. My Google search says, especially for Black men, we tend to see them as violent, as brutes, as thugs. These are the characteristic descriptions. And that's important because those characteristic descriptions do play out into larger ways in which Black men are excluded or included, and Black people are included and excluded from society. Some of the things that I just want to share with you from it was the Kaiser Family Foundation, Harvard 2011 study that was entitled The Race and Recession Survey. And it was giving some, I'm not going to go into all the very specifics of, the details of the data, but what it was saying that Black men overall were more likely to report having a close friend or relative be murdered, more likely to report wrongful arrest, being the victims of violent crime, and maybe even obviously being laid off more as well. And they're more likely to report being unemployed or underemployed. And so when I think about the ways in which we look at what Dr. King was doing around equity, one driving force that he was really trying to bring to us was economic equity, right? He was bringing to us the Poor People's Campaign. And why was he doing this? He was doing this work so that together we could unify and we could bring ourselves, all of us, all poor people, out of economic disparity. And this is when I think about equity, and equity being something where we're creating a fair playing field, or a level, I should say, a level playing field. So that means that if certain people need more, they get more. And if certain people need less, they get less so that we can create that equity. But here's something that Dr. King said about the Poor People's Campaign. He said that it's the beginning of a new cooperation and understanding and a determination by poor people of all colors and backgrounds to assert and win their right to a decent life and respect for their culture and their dignity. And it was at this point, this place of trying to create economic equity, where the powers that be in this country decided that he was doing too much, right? It was okay when he was just targeting one group of people. But when he was really looking at shifting the economic infrastructure of this country, it became too much. And I believe that that was really in part the reason why he was assassinated. And so when we're talking about diversity and equity, we're talking about things as healthcare professionals from a social impact position. I want us to really think about how we, as healthcare professionals, look at the social health and impact, the social justice of the patients and the populations that we serve, because that is the way that Dr. King was positioning himself. And that is the way that I believe we, as healthcare professionals who are also everyday heroes, need to really position ourselves. So now what I would like to do is just talk to you about those three things that we can do to make diversity, equity, and inclusion everyday habits for us. The first thing that I'll share is get grounded. And that is something that I share in my workbook. And it sounds super simple, right? It sounds simple. And I'll explain what it is for those that don't really understand grounding principles and grounding practices. But getting grounded is the first step to creating a habit that will help you become aware of your own self and your own body. And even more importantly, maybe even noticing your emotions. A lot of times we get triggered when we're talking about DEI stuff. And that's okay. I get triggered. It makes me uncomfortable. But knowing that that's what's going to happen and then realizing where it's landing in our body is really, really important if we're going to teach it and if we're going to do it. So, what I wanted to do was a quick grounding exercise. It's not going to take too long. You're welcome to do it, participate if you like. If you're just like, kind of want to sit out and observe, totally fine as well. But if you want to, let me show you this grounding technique that you can then use in your daily practice, whether you're doing it before meetings, in meetings, with groups of students that you're working with peers, or even just on your own. It's just a great and simple tool. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So to get grounded, I just invite you to place your feet flat on the floor. If you're able to, sit up in your chair, place your palms in your lap. I invite you to close your eyes if that is something you're inclined to do. If you're not, totally understandable and okay. But just get yourself in a place where you can feel your body and just begin to take some nice natural breaths. And like I said with grounding, it's about noticing. So I invite you to just notice your body. Yes, notice. For some of us, this may be the first time we have taken a moment today. Take a moment. Notice your shoulders, your neck, your spine, your arms, your hands, and breathe. Now notice your hips, your thighs, your kneecaps, your lower legs, your feet. How are you feeling right now, physically, maybe even emotionally? And breathe into your body. Now I invite you to place your hand over your heart if you desire to anchor your awareness there. And I want you to think of two things that you're grateful for and why. and breathe. And now I want you to notice if there's been any shifts or changes in tightness or tension or quantity or quality of your breath. Just notice. Just notice. And when you're ready, you wiggle fingers and toes, roll your shoulders, move your neck around, open your eyes, and come back into this space. That is grounding practice. And as simple as it is, I do this practice whenever I'm meeting with a group of people. I do grounding practice every day for myself. It's just a way to become aware. And it's a way actually to soothe your nervous system as well, especially when you're talking about things that wire you up or get you really wound up. So, that is one tool that you can take away today to make DEI an everyday habit. The second thing is make doing something about bias a personal investment in self growth. I want to share a story with you. And some of you may have heard this story in other circles that I talk about as well. But I want to share a story with you about a dinner party that I went to just the other night. Went to this dinner party and a friend of mine invited me, a great friend. She graduated from nursing school. I was her first clinical instructor in nursing school, and she's graduated with a DNP and an NP. Super proud of her. But I went to this dinner party, and I am the only Black person. It's a small party. It's me and my son, and it was her, and there was other folks at the table, and we were just talking, chatting, laughing, having a great time. There was a white man that was there. And because I don't remember his name, we're going to call him Tom. Okay. And I was talking to Tom, having a great time, just chatting about things. And he was talking about his job. And as he was sharing about his job, he was saying that it took him about a month to get his job. And he wasn't even sure that he was going to get it. And he let slip that he thought the reason why it took so long was because they were looking for a diversity hire. And it was at this moment where I had to pause and make a decision for myself, right? That's where grounding comes in. I had to pause in the moment and decide, do I engage or do I not engage? And I made a decision consciously to not engage. And my friend whose dinner party it was asked, what's a diversity hire? And so he began to explain what a diversity hire was. And in his definition, he said it's where they try to hire someone who's diverse. Well, remember what I said just a little bit ago, that we are all diverse, right? We all have different aspects of diversity. So I knew that that wasn't really the word that he was trying to use. What he was really trying to say, of course, is that they were trying to find someone who was a person of color essentially for this role. Well, apparently they weren't able to find anyone. And after a month, they actually, he received the job. And what was striking to me and awkward for me also at the same time was that he said that when he got the job, that they actually gave him $10,000 on top of, the offer. And taking a moment to just sort of pause on that, what that said to me was that as a white man, he not only received a job that they were intending to create space for a person of color because there were so few people of color in the role, but he received the job and automatically $10,000 on top of it. And I can tell you from personal experience that every position that I've ever had, I've had to negotiate, I've had to bargain, I've had to really work hard to get the money that I get. And you probably have as well. I'm not sure. But I know for me that it was off putting to hear him say that he got this job that they had intended really for someone who needed the space to be in this role, and he got it with a bonus. What it said to me was that he needed to do some work about really looking at his own experience around bias. And really, we all do, right? We're all biased in some way. And he really needed to think about his own personal investment at doing something about the biases that he carries. So we all invest something. Every day we make personal investments, whether they be in our appearance or in going to work so that we can make money, or we invest in our family and our friends, or some of us like myself invest in their businesses or our children. We're making investments constantly. So I would encourage you to do something every day to make a personal investment in your self growth towards being a more inclusive and expansive thinking person. And you're doing that today by paying it forward on MLK and actually making an investment of your time. But that's just the story I wanted to share because these kinds of experiences happen all the time. And I would put that in the category of unconscious bias and even microaggression, which we can talk about in an upcoming chat and chew. The third thing that I would talk about is reframing a conversation to view it from a Black, Indigenous, Latina, person of color perspective. What do I mean by that? That's a little bit more subtle than other things because a lot of the times, what has happened in America is that everything that we look at is framed from the perspective of white bodied people for the most part in our media perceptions, jobs, schools, culture. That is the frame that we are looking at everything. I argue that instead of looking at something or creating judgment about an experience based on what you think and you know to be true, because that's what society has taught, instead of making or forcing Black and Brown folks to prove themselves right, think of it the other way. Force yourself to prove that your perspective as a white bodied person, or even just as a person, is correct. Reframe it so that we are not so much giving the benefit of the doubt to people of color, but we are definitely looking at this from the perspective of, I see how that could be true. And let me look at history and see the ways in which this could be or historically could be true. We can totally talk about that in our debrief. And then lastly, I would say we need to apply empathy, which is really a part of what we're doing right now. That's what Dr. King was about creating love instead of hate. And empathy building is not as simple as what it seems, right? It's not only confronting the experiences of others, it's confronting our own experiences, which is a part of grounding. That's why we ground ourselves so we can confront our own experiences and even interpret those experiences and understand what they mean and process them through these emotional responses. So it's taking the idea that we have or the ideas that we have, reframing them to see them from the perspective of BIPOC people. It's looking at the way in which we message things, what comes out of our mouth after we think it. And then, as we did in our grounding, centering things around our heart. So, the three things that we talked about today was to be grounded. The second thing that we talked about, it's my dog shaking the door. The second thing that we talked about was actually looking at and doing, being aware, I guess you could say, of how we can make a personal investment in being aware of our biases. And the third thing was really being able to, gosh, I forgot it, to reframe the conversation. So that's really what I wanted to share with you today. Simple, easy things that you can think about and that you can do to really ground and reframe and think through how you can make this a part of your everyday habit. So if you would like to, I invite you to share some of your thoughts about what you've learned today. Tell me what you're thinking. And thanks so much for your participation. Stop the share.
Well, I'm taking in the cue to reframe the perspective of, like that's a practice. That's a daily practice that I can, the default is my view, my feelings, my everything. And to just pause and ground and be curious, like, wait a minute, what if I started with what you're presenting or what you're feeling or what your experience might be, to like just start with that lens.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. Yeah. And it's work, right? It's a practice, but I think honestly that if we make this a practice in our lives, if we think of it as an investment like we do other types of investments, then I think that we can collectively really begin to understand each other better and be more empathetic, because empathy is really something, it seems simple, but it can be really tough to empathize with other people when we're so focused on what we think is true and what we feel to be the most important experience. So I want to say thank you all to for participating today in our lunch and learn and chat and chew. Happy to share with you the next one, and I look forward to more conversations with you. I hope that you make today a day on and not a day off. And remember that I am Nikki, and the work that I do is really around coaching and sharing with you ways in which you can be intentional with your practice for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I love, love, love working with nursing organizations. So, any nursing organizations that are interested in partnering or sharing about the resources that they want to invest in the work of DEI, let me know. And also, I want to let you know that I'm a part of a network called Nurse Champions for Justice, in which we as nurses come together to do this work very, very intentionally, the work of healing and transformation. And I will share more about that in upcoming chat and chews. So I wanted to say thank you so much for being here today. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.